June the 20th, 1944. The Norman hedgerows trembled under artillery fire as Staff Sergeant William "Red" McKenna of the 2nd Armored Division crouched behind a shattered stone wall, watching German forces retreat eastward from their crumbling positions near St. Lo. The acrid smell of cordite mixed with burning timber hung thick in the humid summer air, and through the smoke, something caught his eye. A massive 8-wheeled German half-track, abandoned but intact, sitting beside a knocked-out Panzer IV like a forgotten trophy. "Sarge, you seeing what I'm seeing?" Private First Class Tommy Rizzo called out, his Brooklyn accent cutting through the distant rumble of tanks. The young ammunition bearer had already started moving toward the vehicle, his M1 Garand slung across his back, curiosity overcoming caution. McKenna raised his hand sharply. "Hold position, Rizzo. Could be booby-trapped." But even as he issued the warning, his own fascination pulled him forward. The vehicle before them was an Sonderkraft Fahrzeug 7, an Sd.Kfz 7 heavy tractor in military nomenclature, one of Germany's primary artillery prime movers. Its angular armor plating gleamed dully beneath layers of dust and battle residue, and the massive Maybach HL-62 engine compartment suggested raw mechanical power that made American equipment seem almost delicate by comparison. Corporal James "Doc" Patterson, the unit's makeshift mechanic from Detroit, approached with the careful eye of a man who had spent his civilian life rebuilding Ford engines. "That's a beast," he muttered, running his hand along the vehicle's track assembly. "Krauts use these to haul their 88mm flak guns. Thing probably weighs, 11 tons empty?" According to documentation later reviewed by military intelligence officers and referenced in the United States Army's post-war technical analysis reports, the Sd.Kfz 7 indeed weighed approximately 11.5 tons unloaded and could transport up to 12 fully equipped soldiers while towing artillery pieces weighing several additional tons across virtually any terrain. McKenna made his decision quickly. "Patterson, Rizzo, check it for explosives. We're taking this back to battalion. Captain Morrison will want to see what we caught." The examination took 20 tense minutes. Patterson crawled beneath the chassis, inspecting every wire and connection point, while Rizzo cleared the crew compartment of abandoned German equipment, gas masks, empty ammunition crates, and a single Wehrmacht helmet with a bullet hole through its crown. When Patterson finally gave the all-clear, he climbed into the driver's position, studying the unfamiliar controls with growing appreciation. "Instruments are labeled in German, but the layout makes sense," he called down. "Clutch, brake, throttle, same principles as our stuff. Transmission's different, though, looks like a synchromesh system, more sophisticated than our crash boxes." The engine roared to life on the third attempt, its deep mechanical thunder drowning out the distant artillery. Black smoke belched from the exhaust as Patterson nursed the cold engine, adjusting the choke until it settled into a rough idle. McKenna watched the fuel gauge needle dance and noticed something that would later prove significant. The tank was nearly 3/4 full, yet the gauge suggested a consumption rate that seemed excessive, even for such a large vehicle. The convoy formed up 40 minutes after capturing the KFZ-7, with Patterson at the helm of the German tractor and McKenna riding in the commander's position beside him. The vehicle's handling characteristics became immediately apparent as they maneuvered through the cratered roads leading back to the division's rear assembly area near Carentan. Unlike the relatively nimble M3 half-tracks that composed most of their mechanized infantry support, the German machine felt ponderous, powerful, and surprisingly smooth over rough terrain. "It's like driving a locomotive," Patterson shouted over the engine noise, wrestling the steering levers through a sharp turn. The Sd.Kfz used a complex steering system that combined wheel turning with differential braking on the tracks, a sophisticated arrangement that provided excellent maneuverability for such a heavy vehicle, but required constant attention from the driver. Private Rizzo, riding in the rear compartment with 5 other curious soldiers who had piled aboard, kept running commentary on every bump and sway. "My aunt's Buick rides smoother than this, but I'll admit, you feel like you could drive through a brick wall and keep going." The journey covered approximately 15 miles, threading through liberated French villages where civilians emerged to watch the unusual sight of American soldiers operating captured German equipment. In the town of Isigny-sur-Mer, A group of French resistance fighters actually saluted the vehicle before realizing its occupants wore American uniforms rather than Wehrmacht gray. The confusion on their faces shifted to laughter and celebration as McKenna waved, the stars and stripes now hastily tied to the vehicle's radio antenna. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Hendricks, the battalion's executive officer, was waiting when they rolled into the motor pool area. The colonel, a West Point graduate from the class of '38, circled the Sd.Kfz 7 with the analytical eye of a professional soldier who understood that intelligence about enemy equipment could save American lives. "Outstanding work, Sergeant McKenna," Hendricks said, climbing onto the vehicle to inspect the interior. "Division Intelligence will want to examine this thoroughly. The Engineering Corps has been requesting intact German vehicles for technical evaluation." He paused, noticing the fuel gauge. "How much fuel did this journey consume?" Patterson consulted the gauge again, his expression troubled. "Sir, we started with about 3/4 of a tank. That's roughly 150 liters based on the markings. We've traveled maybe 15 miles, and we're down to half. That's approximately 75 liters for 15 miles. The numbers hung in the air, heavy with implication. Hendricks pulled out a small notebook and performed quick calculations. "That's 5 liters per mile. Our M3 half-tracks average about 1.5 liters per mile under similar conditions." He looked up sharply. "You're telling me this vehicle burns more than 3 times the fuel?" "Possibly more, sir," Patterson replied, his mechanic's pride stung by the inefficiency. The engine was cold-started, which always increases consumption, but even accounting for that, this machine is a glutton. The Maybach HL62 is a powerful engine, 140 horsepower, but it's also a thirsty one. June 21, 1944. Captain Robert Morrison of the division's Ordnance Section arrived at dawn with a team of 3 mechanics and a technical sergeant from the Army's Automotive Section. The Sd.Kfz 7 sat in the motor pool like a captured dragon, drawing curious stares from passing soldiers who had never seen such a vehicle up close. Morrison, a former engineering professor from MIT who had enlisted after Pearl Harbor, approached the examination with scientific rigor that would have impressed his former colleagues. "Gentlemen," Morrison addressed the assembled group, "this vehicle represents one of Germany's primary logistics solutions for heavy artillery transport. Understanding its capabilities and limitations provides insight into Wehrmacht operational doctrine." He gestured to Technical Sergeant Frank Kowalski, who had brought a comprehensive toolkit and several reference manuals captured from German maintenance facilities. Kowalski began the systematic examination, starting with the engine compartment. The Maybach HL62 gasoline engine, a 6-cylinder inline design producing 140 horsepower at 2,600 revolutions per minute, dominated the forward section. "This is pre-war German engineering at its finest," Kowalski explained, his Polish immigrant parents having taught him enough German to decipher the technical markings. "The build quality is excellent. Machined components, careful tolerances, robust construction. But there's a philosophical difference here from American design." He pointed to the carburetor assembly, a complex device with multiple adjustment points. "German engineers designed for performance and capability across extreme conditions. This engine can operate in Russian winter and North African summer. That versatility requires a rich fuel mixture and a powerful delivery system, which means high consumption under all conditions." Morrison took extensive notes while Patterson and the other mechanics measured, photographed, and documented every aspect of the vehicle. The transmission proved particularly interesting, an 8-speed synchromesh design that provided excellent torque multiplication for towing heavy loads, but added mechanical complexity that American designs deliberately avoided. "Our doctrine emphasizes simplicity and ease of maintenance," Morrison observed, running his hand over the transmission casing. "A farm boy from Kansas can learn to repair an M3 half-track with basic tools. This machine requires specialized training and precision instruments." The fuel system examination revealed the core of the consumption problem. The Sd.Kfz 7 carried 2 150-liter fuel tanks, a total capacity of 300 liters compared to the M3's 228 liters. Yet despite this greater capacity, the operational range proved disappointingly limited. Private Rizzo, who had been assisting with measurements, did the mathematics on a scrap of paper. Sarge, if this thing burns 5 liters per mile, the total range is only 60 miles. Our half-tracks can go 160 miles on a full tank. Worse than that, Patterson interjected. These numbers are on relatively flat French roads. The German manual, he pointed to a captured maintenance guide Kowalski had translated, indicates fuel consumption increases by 30 to 40% when towing heavy loads cross-country. You could burn through both tanks in 40 miles under combat conditions. The following 3 days transformed the captured Sd.Kfz 7 into an experimental laboratory on wheels. Captain Morrison organized a series of controlled tests to quantify the vehicle's performance characteristics, fuel consumption patterns, and operational limitations. The tests took place on a designated route northeast of Carentan, a 12-mile circuit that included paved roads, dirt tracks, muddy fields, and a series of hills that simulated combat terrain. Test 1 commenced at 0600 hours on June 22nd. The Sd.Kfz, with Patterson driving and Morrison riding as observer, carried a simulated load of 2,000 pounds, roughly equivalent to the weight of ammunition and supplies the vehicle would transport in combat operations, though far less than the artillery pieces it was designed to tow. The fuel tanks had been topped off completely, and Morrison carried a stopwatch, odometer readings, and measurement equipment borrowed from the division's reconnaissance section. The results confirmed their initial concerns. Over the 12-mile circuit, which took 47 minutes to complete at an average speed of 15 miles per hour, the vehicle consumed 63 liters of fuel, approximately 5.2 liters per mile. The terrain variations had minimal impact on this rate, suggesting the high consumption was inherent to the engine design rather than a function of load or conditions. The Germans built this for power, not efficiency, Morrison noted in his report, which would later be forwarded to the Army's Technical Intelligence Division and referenced in post-war studies of Axis logistics. The Maybach engine operates with a rich fuel mixture across its entire performance range. There's no economy mode, no conservation setting, just consistent high-output performance that demands constant fuel supply. Test 2, conducted the following afternoon, involved towing a captured German K-40 anti-tank gun weighing approximately 3,000 pounds. The results were sobering. Fuel consumption increased to 6.8 liters per mile, and the vehicle's speed dropped to an average of 11 miles per hour over the same circuit. The mathematics told a grim story. Towing operational loads, the Sd.Kfz 7 could travel perhaps 44 miles before exhausting its fuel supply. Corporal Patterson, whose mechanical intuition had been honed by years of coaxing performance from worn-out civilian vehicles during the Depression, identified another critical factor. Sir, the transmission gearing is optimized for torque, not speed. Every gear ratio prioritizes pulling power over efficiency. When you're hauling an 88mm flak gun weighing 5 tons, you need that torque, but you pay for it at the fuel pump. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks observed the final test on June 24th, bringing with him Major Thomas Weaver from Division G4, the logistics section responsible for supply planning. Weaver, a career officer who had cut his teeth on supply operations in North Africa, understood immediately the strategic implications of what he was witnessing. The Germans are losing the logistics war, Weaver said bluntly, watching the Sd.Kfz 7 rumble past trailing black exhaust smoke. Every one of these vehicles requires 3 times the fuel of our equivalent equipment. Multiply that across thousands of vehicles, add in their Tiger and Panther tanks with their even worse fuel economy, and you understand why the Luftwaffe is grounded and their panzers are running out of gas. The technical report that Captain Morrison compiled over the following week stretched to 47 pages, complete with photographs, diagrams, fuel consumption charts, and comparative analyses with American equipment. The document, classified as restricted and distributed to senior logistics officers throughout European theater of operations, provided insights that extended far beyond simple mechanical curiosity. Morrison's key findings painted a portrait of an army designed for short, decisive campaigns, but increasingly trapped in a war of attrition it could not sustain. The Sd.Kfz 7 epitomized this contradiction. A magnificently engineered vehicle capable of extraordinary performance under extreme conditions, yet so inefficient that it consumed resources faster than Germany's shrinking petroleum supplies could provide. The average American infantry division, Morrison wrote in his analysis section, operates approximately 450 vehicles of various types, consuming roughly 300,000 gallons of gasoline monthly under active combat conditions. A comparable German division equipped with vehicles like the Sd.Kfz and heavy tanks requires approximately 900,000 gallons monthly, 3 times our consumption for similar operational output. Major Weaver took these findings to a logistics conference held at 1st Army headquarters in late June, where senior supply officers gathered to plan operations following the eventual breakout from Normandy. The conference, attended by representatives from every Allied division and theater, examined supply requirements for the anticipated drive into Germany itself. "Gentlemen, the enemy's fuel crisis is real and worsening," Weaver explained, using Morrison's data to illustrate his points. "The Ploesti oil fields in Romania are under constant bombardment by our air forces. Synthetic fuel production in Germany cannot compensate for natural petroleum losses. Every gallon of fuel we capture, we deny to Wehrmacht operations." Brigadier General Thomas Curtis, the 1st Army's logistics commander, leaned forward with interest. "You're suggesting fuel interdiction should be a primary operational objective?" "I'm suggesting it already is, sir, whether we've formalized it or not," Weaver replied. "Every fuel depot we destroy, every tanker truck we eliminate, every pipeline we cut. These actions have multiplicative effects because German vehicles are so inefficient. A single destroyed fuel convoy doesn't just impact one battle. It potentially grounds an entire panzer battalion." The implications resonated through Allied planning. Intelligence officers began prioritizing fuel infrastructure targets. Air forces increased attacks on refineries, storage facilities, and transportation networks. Ground commanders received briefings on identifying and capturing German fuel supplies intact when possible, then destroying what couldn't be secured. Sergeant McKenna, who had started this entire analysis by capturing the Sd.Kfz, received a commendation from Division Command for his initiative. But the recognition that meant most came from Captain Morrison, who visited the sergeant's unit during a rare lull in combat operations. "Your captured vehicle has become quite famous," Morrison told him, sharing a cigarette behind an ammunition truck while artillery rumbled in the distance. "The technical intelligence people in London have requested we ship it back for complete disassembly and analysis. They're particularly interested in the fuel injection system, want to understand what not to do in future American designs." McKenna grinned. "So we captured a vehicle that teaches us how not to build vehicles?" "In a sense, yes," Morrison acknowledged. "But more importantly, you've provided evidence that helps us understand why we're winning this war. It's not just about bravery or tactics or industrial production, though those all matter. We're winning because our logistics work. We've built an army that can sustain itself in the field, that doesn't consume resources faster than our supply chains can deliver them. The Germans built an army for short wars, and now they're stuck in a long one." August 1944. The breakout from Normandy transformed the campaign from grinding attrition to sweeping advance, and the fuel implications that Captain Morrison had documented in his technical report became brutally apparent across the collapsing German front. Staff Sergeant McKenna's unit, now part of the rapid exploitation force racing eastward toward Paris, encountered increasing numbers of abandoned German vehicles, Tigers, Panthers, half-tracks, and numerous Sd.Kfz 7 tractors sitting beside roads with empty fuel tanks and no damage beyond what desperation had inflicted. Private Rizzo, whose Brooklyn cynicism had been tempered by weeks of combat into something approaching battlefield wisdom, surveyed a particularly notable scene near Argentan. 7 German vehicles in various states of abandonment, including 2 Sd.Kfz-7s that appeared mechanically sound but completely out of fuel. "They just walked away," he said, almost disbelieving. "Billion-dollar equipment, and they walked away because they couldn't fill the tank." Technical Sergeant Kowalski, who had accompanied Morrison's ordnance team forward to continue documenting captured German equipment, examined the abandoned vehicles with professional interest. "Not billion-dollar," he corrected absently. "But your point stands. These Sd.Kfz-7s cost approximately 70,000 Reichsmarks each to produce, roughly 28,000 American dollars at pre-war exchange rates. Perfectly functional machines abandoned because they burn 5 liters per mile and the fuel trucks never arrived. The pattern repeated across the entire front. As Allied forces encircled German units in the Falaise pocket, Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographs, later captured and analyzed, showed German commanders desperately attempting to establish fuel distribution points only to watch Allied fighter bombers destroy the tanker convoys before they could reach forward units. The German army, designed for blitzkrieg operations where rapid advances captured enemy fuel supplies, found itself trapped in exactly the opposite situation. A fighting retreat where every mile backward stretched already overstrained logistics to the breaking point. Captain Morrison, whose technical report had been so prescient, received promotion to major and assignment to SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, where his expertise in German logistics informed strategic planning. Before departing, he visited McKenna's unit one final time, bringing with him a photographer from Army Public Relations and an unusual request. "Sergeant, how would you feel about posing with that Sd.Kfz 7 one more time? Public Relations wants photographs for a technical bulletin they're preparing about captured enemy equipment. They're calling it Know Your Enemy's Weaknesses, educational material for new units arriving from the States." The photography session took place on a sunny afternoon near Chartres, where the captured Sd.Kfz 7 had been temporarily stationed at a forward maintenance depot. McKenna and his squad posed beside the vehicle, which now bore American markings and had been painted with a sardonic nickname, Fuel Hog. The photographs taken by Private First Class Eddie Schwartz of the Signal Corps would eventually appear in military training publications and, decades later, in historical archives documenting the campaign. "Make sure you get the fuel gauge in one shot," Morrison instructed Schwartz. "I want people to see how much fuel this monster burns. That's the real story. Not the armor or the power, but the appetite." Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks, now commanding the battalion after his predecessor's promotion, reflected on the broader implications during an evening conversation with his senior non-commissioned officers. The discussion took place in a commandeered French farmhouse, maps spread across a dining table where a family had once shared meals, now transformed into a military planning center. "The intelligence summaries from Corps indicate German fuel stocks in France have collapsed," Hendricks explained, pointing to marked positions on the map. "The Wehrmacht is burning approximately 400,000 tons of fuel monthly, roughly 100 million gallons, but production and delivery are providing less than half that amount. The shortfall compounds every week." September 1944. The pursuit had carried McKenna's division across France and into Belgium, where autumn rains transformed roads into rivers of mud, and the initial euphoria of liberation gave way to the grinding reality of determined German resistance. The fuel crisis that had so fascinated Captain Morrison's technical analysis revealed its human dimension in ways that no report could adequately capture. Near the Belgian town of Bastogne, McKenna's squad encountered a column of German prisoners, approximately 200 Wehrmacht soldiers being marched westward toward POW processing centers. Among them, an Obergefreiter, a senior lance corporal, named Klaus Bergmann, who had served as a driver and mechanic with an artillery unit equipped with Sd.Kfz 7s. Through the division's German-speaking interpreter, Lieutenant Hans Schiller, Bergmann told a story that gave human voice to the technical data Morrison had compiled. "We had 3 tractors in my unit," Bergmann explained, his French and English adequate for basic communication. "In Russia, 1942, they performed magnificently. Power, reliability, they could pull our guns through mud that swallowed other vehicles. But the fuel?" He shook his head wearily. "Always the fuel. We burned through our allocation in 3 days of what should have been a week's operations. The supply sergeant screamed. The officers requisitioned civilian fuel. We even drained fuel from abandoned vehicles. It was never enough." Corporal Patterson, whose mechanical expertise had proven invaluable throughout the campaign, listened with professional curiosity that transcended the adversarial relationship between captor and captive. "Your engineers must have known about the consumption problem. Why not redesign the engine for efficiency?" "Of course they knew," Bergmann replied, a bitter smile crossing his weathered face. "But the Army demanded power to tow the heaviest guns across the worst terrain in any weather. Efficiency was secondary. In 1940, when we had the oil fields of Romania and stocks captured from France, this seemed acceptable. By 1943, in Russia, when we were retreating and every fuel depot was behind us. He trailed off, the unfinished sentence conveying more than words could. The conversation, recorded by Lieutenant Schiller in his debriefing notes and later forwarded to intelligence analysis, provided insights that no captured manual could offer. The German fuel crisis wasn't merely a technical problem or a strategic miscalculation. It was a daily reality that had eroded Wehrmacht effectiveness through countless small failures that accumulated into operational collapse. Private Rizzo, listening to the exchange, voiced a question that had troubled him since Normandy. If you knew you were running out of gas, why keep building tanks and vehicles that burned so much? Bergman's response came slowly, measured by the exhaustion of a man who had spent 3 years watching his nation's military power dissipate like smoke. Because stopping production meant admitting defeat. Because Hitler demanded miracle weapons and super-heavy tanks. Because the planners in Berlin believed we could still capture Soviet oil fields, still force a negotiated peace, still somehow win. And because, by the time the crisis became undeniable, we had committed everything to these designs, the factories, the supply chains, the doctrine. Changing course would have meant years of retooling we did not have. Major Morrison, making one of his periodic visits to forward units to gather additional data for chef analyses, joined the conversation. His questions probed deeper than technical specifications, seeking to understand the organizational culture that had produced such magnificent yet fundamentally flawed equipment. The Sd.Kfz-7 we captured in June, Morrison said to Bergman, showing him photographs from the technical evaluation, consumed 5 liters per mile under moderate conditions, 6 to 7 when towing heavy loads. Were these figures consistent with your experience? Consistent? Bergman laughed without humor. Those are optimistic. In winter, cold starting the engines, we sometimes burned 8 or 9 liters per mile for the first hour. In combat, under stress, drivers would overthrottle, racing the engines, and consumption could spike to 10 liters per mile. I have seen a tractor burn through both fuel tanks in 30 miles of combat operations. The mathematics of catastrophe became clear. German artillery doctrine relied on mobile heavy guns that could rapidly reposition to avoid counter-battery fire. But the vehicles designed to provide that mobility consumed fuel so voraciously that sustained operations became impossible. Artillery batteries found themselves immobile for lack of fuel, unable to retreat when threatened, unable to advance to support attacks, transformed into expensive static emplacements that Allied fighter bombers could destroy at leisure. November 1944. The campaign that had begun with McKenna's capture of a single Sd.Kfz-7 had evolved into a theater-wide understanding of German logistical vulnerabilities, and the implications extended far beyond fuel consumption statistics. Major Morrison's expanded report, now classified secret and distributed to planning staffs throughout the Allied command structure, drew connections between technical performance and strategic outcomes that would influence military thinking for generations. The document, officially titled Analysis of German Logistics Constraints, Technical Inefficiency and Operational Implications, synthesized data from hundreds of captured vehicles, prisoner interrogations, seized documents, and battlefield observations. Morrison's conclusion struck at the heart of why Germany was losing the war. The Wehrmacht has constructed a military force optimized for campaigns of 6 to 8 weeks duration, assuming access to captured enemy supplies and rapid operational victory. This force performs magnificently within those parameters, but becomes progressively less effective as campaigns extend beyond initial planning assumptions. The fundamental mismatch between vehicle fuel consumption and available supply has created a cascading series of failures that no amount of tactical brilliance can overcome. Staff Sergeant McKenna, now wearing the Bronze Star for actions during the liberation of Paris and promoted to platoon sergeant, read portions of Morrison's report in a letter the major had sent him. The recognition that his initial capture had contributed to strategic analysis gave McKenna a perspective on warfare that transcended the immediate concerns of survival and small unit tactics. "We think war is about courage and firepower," McKenna told his squad during a rare quiet evening in a Belgian village liberated weeks earlier. But it's really about logistics, fuel, ammunition, food, replacement parts. The Germans built beautiful machines that their supply system couldn't sustain. We built simple machines that our supply system can flood forward in overwhelming numbers. Guess who wins? Private Rizzo, now a hardened veteran despite his youth, nodded understanding. That Sd.Kfz 7 we grabbed in June. Beautiful vehicle, ran smooth, powerful as hell, but useless if you can't keep the tank filled. The captured German tractor that had initiated this entire analytical journey ended its operational life in December 1944, transferred to the Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for detailed technical evaluation. Engineers would spend months disassembling every component, measuring tolerances, analyzing metallurgy, and documenting design philosophies. The vehicle's fate, preserved as a museum piece, stood in stark contrast to the thousands of American M3 half-tracks that continued serving throughout the war and into the post-war period, their simpler designs proving far more sustainable. Corporal Patterson, who had been that first American soldier to start the Maybach engine back in Normandy, received assignment to the technical evaluation team at Aberdeen. His last conversation with McKenna before shipping stateside captured the lessons they had learned through months of combat and observation. "That German tractor taught us something important," Patterson said, packing his duffel bag in preparation for the journey home. "It's not enough to build the best equipment. You have to build equipment that your logistical system can support, that your maintenance crews can repair with available tools, that your supply chain can sustain in the field." The Germans forgot that, or never learned it. We remembered. That's why we're winning. The technical analysis of the Sd.Kfz 7 and similar German equipment would inform American military vehicle design for decades. Post-war development programs emphasized operational efficiency, maintainability, and logistical sustainability, principles directly derived from understanding the Wehrmacht's failures. The magnificent but flawed German vehicles became cautionary examples of what not to do, lessons purchased with the blood and treasure of global conflict. By war's end, the strategic implications of German fuel inefficiency had become painfully clear in both Eastern and Western theaters. Soviet forces captured German logistics documents showing that panzer divisions rated at full strength possessed less than 30% operational vehicles due to fuel shortages. American forces advancing into Germany encountered entire armored units abandoned for lack of fuel, their crews surrendering or fleeing on foot, leaving behind equipment that represented millions of Reichsmarks in investment. Sergeant McKenna survived the war, returned to his home in Pennsylvania, and spent 4 decades working as a high school history teacher. He kept the photographs from that June day in 1944, when his squad captured an Sd.Kfz 7, images of young men grinning beside a massive German half-track, unaware that their battlefield trophy would contribute to strategic understanding of why the Allies won. In his classroom, he would eventually teach students that wars are not won solely by courage or technology, but by the unglamorous mathematics of supply chains, fuel efficiency, and logistical sustainability. Lessons learned one captured vehicle at a time.